Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Today we are going to explain the station of fire setting. Now I'm going to share with you my PDF. Now, the station of fire setting is one of the stations which also comes under the heading of risk assessment with history. So this will be the streak of stations which you should focus on this time of your preparation. Let's make them one chunk of stations with one type of approach. Here it will be the history taking with risk assessment. I've already posted the erotomania and exhibitionism, and you will see that the set of questions in this station is very close to the other two stations, and this is what I recommend. You should have a set of questions for every task in order to make it easier for you. I don't recommend these flashcards. They can be up to 90, sometimes 100 flashcards for the stations. It's not the best approach. So going through how we can approach the station, first we can talk about the story. The candidate notes says that you will have a girl brought to you by the police, 18 years old, because she did set a fire in her apartment, and the neighbors informed the police, but they brought her to you because she has been found in a hysterical state. And pay attention to this, that being hysterical, this means that there can be an underlying personality disorder, a mood disorder, something which requires requires your assessment. And the task is to elicit a history regarding the arson. So want to know more about the story of the arson and also or the event which happened. Okay, and also to formulate a diagnosis. What is written in the role player's note, which is not written in the candidate notes, is that this girl was staying in her apartment, and the TV or the BBC had a documentary, and she was watching it. And this documentary was about the children who had difficult childhood, and this seems that it has stirred negative emotions and negative memories in her mind, and immediately she set the fire in order to ventilate and calm herself down. And the story goes that she has been abandoned by her family after being separated, her mother and father being separated, and she has been adopted by a foster family, and this family abused her physically. And this documentary still all these negative emotions. She has been having this fire setting several times, and she does not feel any empathy after the fire setting, whatever the losses were. The story goes that she has never been also in contact with psychiatric services, and she has never had any type of drugs or alcohol. Regarding her life, she feels that she has empty life without goals and no close relationships. And pay attention to all this information, because this information means that there can be an underlying borderline personality disorder, being abandoned, lack of feeling empty life without goals, no relationships, poor coping with the stressors, and this emotional turmoil, being hysterical and emotional breakdown, state which the police found her. All this hint that there can be an underlying personality disorder. So regarding the task, you must, as I always say, you must have a clear plan by which you will cover the most important points in the history task, or the history and the risk task. Here we have 7 points. The introduction and the first point. I pay attention to the introduction. I always say introduction is the way by which you give the first impression by yourself about yourself, and first impressions persist, and particularly in the stations in which the role player is not forthcoming. He has been brought by the police, and the setting is that he is not happy talking with you, so your introduction must be professional and empathetic and so on. as much as possible. And then, because it is a station of risk assessment, there is an event of interest, a risky event, a highly risky event, which you should assess, and you're going to assess it by the ABC technique. And then the symptoms of the syndrome. Here we have the arson, which is mentioned in the task. You should assess the arson, and this is the syndrome which you are going to assess. Then we have the comorbidity and the impact of coping and risk and past history and family history. All these are points which you find that they are typical questions in all the stations of history, task or history with risk task. And this is the good thing about the history task and the history and the risk task, that once you finish the first 3 points, the point number 4, which is the comorbidity, the point of impact and coping and risk, past history and family history, will be just a routine question. There can be subtle alterations, but still the same outlines, maybe to 95% degree. Now, again, I will just highlight every station in the task and particularly the stations in which there is risk assessment and there can be some sort of tension because the role player will elaborate that he's not happy talking with you. You must have good empathy, and this is something which needs practice and practice and practice from you if the English language is not your first language. The communication skills is a bit challenging if your language is, if you are communicating by a language which is not your first. And here are some sentences which can help you to show empathy. You don't need more than 4 to 5 sentences. And for the assessment of the risk incidence, which you are going to use, which are going to assess by the ABC technique, I will not go through in depth in this technique for the short of the duration of the clip. If you want to know more details about it, you can go to the task tutorials channel, my channel, task tutorials, and check the risk history and risk assessment task. Just in short, you're going to assess the incidents, what happens after the incident, what happened before the incidents. And while you are assessing each of these headings, you are going to check the factual information and the mental state. For example, the incidents, you want to know when, who, where, what happened. All these are the factual information, and the mental state of the patient, what it was in your mind, how were you feeling, did you take anything to alter your state of mind. Okay, so this is the incidents and how it's assessed according to the factual information and the mental state. And likewise, you are going to do this with what happens after and what happened before the incidents. Now let's see how we are going to do the station. And as you will see that the set of questions are very close to the set of questions used in the erotomania and exhibitionism. Very, very close, and I highly recommend that you try to make a set of questions which will help you to open the door for the different stations with the same task like history and risk. Okay. So your introduction, simply you must introduce yourself, greet the patient, and explain the setting, and you must add something to explain that you understand that being brought by the police is a sensitive situation. Rest assured that I will do my best to help you, but I would like to ask some questions in order to help you in the best way, and ask her in the beginning about her personal details, so that you are professional, you are interested in the person himself, in the patient herself, not in the event and the interrogation. You're not a police man, you are a doctor after all. Okay, so you will start by asking her some questions before going through the details. I would like to start by knowing more about you. I gathered from the notes that you have been living in a hostel for how long? How do you feel about being in the hostel? Do you have friends? How about your family? Any stressors, anyone around to support you? This group of questions will help to show that you are professional, and also will cover the social part of history, which is very important. And also it is related to the risk assessment, because these are points which are included in the HCR risk assessment. Then we are going to assess the incidents. As we said, we were going to use the ABC technique. The A is what happened before the incidents, B is what happens in the incidents, C what happens after the incidents. So in the incidents, you are going to gather information when did this arson before, and before going through the details, just start smoothly still. You want to know her part from the story. Just let her speak to words. I would like to start by hearing your part of the story and then check the incidents according to the ABC technique. And in the incidents, ask when did this happen, where, why did you set the fire, who was there with you, and how did you set the fire, anyone was hurt, any damaged properties, okay? And regarding the mental state during the incidents, ask her what was in your mind when you did this, how were you feeling, and ask a very important question, which is, did you feel that it was an urge which you could not control? Because we know that there is something called pyromania, it's an impulse control disorder. Okay, and ask her, did you take anything which can change your state of mind? Maybe she was drunk or the effect of drug. So this is how we start assessing the incidents. Ask her, I would like to start by hearing a part of the story, then ask her about the incidents. Then ask her after the incident, what did you do after that? You tried to set the fire off. Anyone was hurt? Who called the police? And ask her about her mental state. How do you feel about what happened? And at this point, you discover that she doesn't have any remorse. And ask her if there is any plan to repeat what happened and what could prevent her from doing this. And then ask her about what before the incident, the period before the incidents. How was she doing before the incidents? Did she plan for it? Were there any stressors around her? And what made her execute at this time? Okay, and her mental state, how were you feeling prior to the incidents? Maybe she has been depressed, she has been frustrated for any reason. Okay, so this is the second part of the task. First part is the introduction, the second part is the incident assessment, and then the symptoms of the syndrome. In the symptom of the syndrome is the fire setting, the arson itself. You want to know how can you assess this phenomenon. So simply, in general, not only for the arson, any psychological phenomena, if you want to assess it, you can assess it by the following. First of all, you must have a clear timeline. The onset, the course, and the duration, and how was she doing before the onset. Before the onset, if there has been any predisposing and precipitating factors, and the onset, since when did she start to set fire, anything happened at this time, and then ask her about her childhood, because you will find that she is now 18 years old at the onset of fire setting. You will find that it was around the age of 12, something like this. So this is the age of her child. She is the area time of her childhood. So ask her about her childhood, and at this time you will find that there are a lot of difficult memories. And pay attention to this question because it covers an important part of also the borderline personality disorder. Then ask her about the course after that. How did you feel that the fire setting is increasing with time? Anything moves the desire to set the fire in her? And how many times did she set fire? And ask her about some examples. Then ask her if there has been any losses or any casualties because of this behavior. Then this is the first thing in order to assess the symptoms of any phenomenon. If you want to assess any phenomenon, the timeline, okay? And then ask her about three major things: her thinking during the phenomenon, the feeling, and the behavior. So when she is doing this fire setting, what runs in her mind? So this is the thinking. Any particular beliefs behind her behavior? We know that there can be some sort of religious practices behind fire setting, and ask her if she feels that the fire setting is an intrusive and senseless thought, if this is a sort of obsession and compulsion. Okay, so this is the thinking part while you are assessing the phenomenon of arson. Then ask her about her feeling during setting for the fire. Do you feel that this is an uncontrolled impulse? Again, this is for the pyromania. and ask her if she has ever felt sexual excitement during this practice. And the last thing, her behavior while she's setting fire. How does she usually set fire? Any preferable places or tools? And does she always have the tools to set fire, or this is something which comes on the spur of the moment? And ask her if she tries to set off the fire before any losses. So we want to know the behavior of the patient during this phenomenon. So back again, in order to understand how we are going to assess the arson, we are going to set a timeline when this happened and the course, what happened after the onset, and ask about any predisposing and precipitating factors. So this is the timeline, and you want to know exactly what happens in her mind and in her feelings and her behavior during the phenomenon, the thinking and the feeling and behavior during the phenomenon. After covering all these points, you will have a very clear picture about any psychological phenomenon, not only us. Okay. And then we are going to assess the comorbidity. The comorbidity here is the routine questions, but we are going to add on them some questions which will help us to cover the points or the symptoms of the borderline personality disorder. We know that the borderline personality disorder has different symptoms. We can summarize them in the acronym of RICE. R stands for the relations, I stands for the impulsivity and the identity, C stands for the coping and the childhood, and E stands for the emotional numbness and the chronic sense of boredom. And when you assess the comorbidity, you are going to cover the areas of the biopsychosocial. So it is better here to start by the social part of life in order to make sure that you cover as much as possible the points of the borderline personality. To ask her about life circumstances and how does she feel about the future, and if she has clear goals. This is very close to her identity. Okay, her goals definitely reflects a great part of her identity. And ask her about her relations and if she is an impulsive person who acts on the spur of the moment. Okay, and when you assess the mood, in the psychological part, when you assess the mood, add the questions which are related to the borderline personality disorder, like the emotional numbness, the strong sense of the emotional numbness. And I can say, well, to a great extent, this particular symptom, the severe, devastating sense of emotional numbness, it can be pathognomonic to the borderline personality disorder. You cannot find it anywhere else except in borderline personality disorder and sometimes in the post-traumatic stress disorder, or a strong feeling of abandonment. And if the story says that she has this strong feeling of being abandoned because her mother and father left her, or sense of boredom also, it is very common in the patients who have borderline personality disorder, severe sense of boredom. And ask a couple of questions about the psychosis, like stress can bring strange experiences, like hearing voices which no one else can hear, and you ever had any. This is enough. And finally, one question about any physical disorder. So this is the comorbidity, which is, as you can see, these are typical questions of the comorbidity, but we add some questions related to the borderline personality disorder, like the clear goals and the impulsivity and the emotional numbness. Other than this, the whole set of the comorbidity questions are the typical questions of the comorbidity. And as for the coping, typical questions of the coping about the impact and coping and risk. But I would like to add a very important hint, a very important point, which you should remember about the point number 5, which is impact and coping and risk. Once you hear the bell of 5 minutes or 6 minutes, if you did not reach the point number 5, which is the impact and coping and risk, immediately leave whatever you are doing, whatever you're assessing. You should have a good time management, and immediately start assessing the impact and coping and risk, because only 1 minute will be left, and in 1 minute you can hardly cover point number 5, which is impact and coping and risk, the past history and the family history, and finally the delivering of the diagnosis. You can hardly cover all this in 1 minute if you did not reach the point number 5. So when you do the impact assessment of the impact and coping and risk, show empathy, say something like, I'm worried about unisex. How did this behavior of fire setting affect impact your life? And how do you cope whenever you are stressed? Typical questions about the impact and coping and risk. Do you drink alcohol or any recreational drugs? The only question which you are going to add, which is, I think it's also the question which is common, self. Also, we use this question for the stations when we are assessing the impact and coping. So it is the same set of questions, except that we added how did this behavior of foreign setting impact your mind. Okay, and then ask the past history and family history. Same questions. Saying thank you for all this information. Is it the first time for you to talk to a psychiatrist? And ask if there has been any family member who has been in contact with the mental health services. Typical questions, as I said before, points number 4, 5, and 6 are typical questions which you are going to use in all the stations of history task or the history with the risk. And finally, you are going to deliver the diagnosis. Thank you, X. From our discussions, it seemed that you have a fire setting behavior which carries a high risk to you and other, and also there are some borderline personality disorder traits. And I did put this in between brackets because sometimes the Royal College changed the scenario. So the scenario in this material in front of you includes borderline personality traits. Maybe this is not the case. You can have depression. I'm not sure. You will not find a 100% typical scenario of the CASC in any of the material available in your hand. However, you will have the general outline very close to the material which you have. And for terminate saying, the good news is that we have many ways by which we can help you, and I will give you leaflets about all what we have discussed, and I'm looking forward to see you again. So this is how you do the station of the fire setting. I hope that you do this. I practice this station together with the stations of the history and risk. Okay, be smart while you are practicing. Don't waste your time, and try to, have a similar set of questions when you are tackling the task of the history and risk, in order to make sure that you will pass the stage. The CASC is difficult to pass the CASC while you are having 120 dialogues for every station. Okay. And we are going now to talk about the mark sheet. I will not go through details about the mark sheet, but I will highlight that whenever you practice, your reference must be this mark sheet. Okay, whatever you are practicing, whoever you are practicing with, assess your performance and his performance according to this mark sheet. And there is also in the PDF some materials which just will refresh your mind about the fire setting, and there is some terminology which can be a bit confusing: the arson, pyromania, and fire setting. The arson is a legal term. The pyromania is the impulse control disorder, and it is one of the DSM-5 and ICD-10 nosology criteria. And the fire setting is a general term, but does not include the arson, as I said, is the illegal term. So fire setting is all whenever one is setting fire intentionally to the property, okay, and also includes the pyromania. So it is a general. And just have a look at these material rapidly. Don't want this to be an academic preparation for the CASC. This is not the best way to assess to prepare for the CASC. The CASC is a practical approach more than an academic approach. Don't waste your time with textbooks. Never do this. Okay. Thank you so much, doctors, for your time. And if you find that this material is helpful, you can download it from my site, www.castutorial.com. And also you can, if you want to arrange for a sort of personal tutoring, also this can be managed on the CAST tutorial. Thank you.